The summer heat had arrived early that year. Not just the sun-soaked sidewalks or the buzzing insects outside, but a thick, breath-stealing kind of heat that settled in the walls and refused to leave. The dorm building, old and stubborn, wasn't built for this kind of weather. It creaked and moaned like it was sweating too. And inside one of those small, barely ventilated rooms, two students were trying to make peace with their new environment. Tyler had only been at the dorm for 3 days. Summer courses were intense, and the university offered limited housing options. His roommate, Julian, had arrived a day earlier and already claimed the bed near the only window that actually opened. That seemed fair, Tyler figured. At the time, the AC unit hummed weakly in the corner and promised enough air to survive. But by the afternoon of day 3, it sputtered once, then gave up entirely. A few rattles, a dying sigh, and silence. What replaced it was suffocating stillness, heavy and unrelenting. No breeze. No relief. Just the sound of sweat forming and nothing drying. Tyler sat up on his bed, peeling his back from the thin mattress cover. His shirt clung to his skin like wet tissue paper. He could feel it sticking to the curve of his spine, down the backs of his arms, in places that made him itch and wince. He tried fanning himself with a textbook but gave up after 30 seconds. The heat laughed at him. He glanced across the room. Julian was sitting at his desk, motionless, staring into the screen of his laptop. His hair stuck to his forehead. His tank top was soaked through around the collar and under his arms, and Tyler couldn't help but feel a little sorry for the guy. Neither of them said anything. The silence had grown over the past few days, not uncomfortable exactly, but hesitant. Like both of them were waiting for the other to break it. The walls radiated warmth like they'd absorbed the sun's anger. Every breath felt like sipping on thick air. Tyler wiped the sweat from his upper lip and got up slowly, dragging his feet toward the small fridge. The cold water bottle inside was like a miracle. He pressed it to his neck before taking a sip, then turned toward Julian. "Want one?" he offered, his voice low and scratchy from the dry air. Julian looked up, as if waking from a trance. He nodded, wordless. Tyler tossed him the bottle gently. Their eyes met for a second longer than expected, not awkward, not intense, just there. Present. Tyler turned away quickly. He wasn't sure why, but the heat wasn't the only thing making his skin feel tight. Hours passed. They tried everything, fans on high speed, doors propped open, cold showers, but nothing worked. The heat just thickened. It started to change things, made the world feel slower, stickier, more raw. With every drop of sweat came a new layer of impatience. Tyler sat again, this time cross-legged on the floor in front of the fan, shirt rolled halfway up his chest to cool off. He didn't care anymore. Modesty and manners melted when the air refused to move. Julian let out a sharp sigh. It startled Tyler. "This is hell," Julian said, standing up suddenly. He paced the room once, then again, then walked toward the window. He pushed it wider, leaning out for air that wasn't there. "I feel like my skin is boiling." Tyler laughed weakly. "You think they'll fix it tomorrow?" Julian shook his head. "Maintenance is off campus till Monday. It's just us and the heat." There was a pause. Not the kind that waits for an answer, but the kind that holds something else underneath. Julian stepped back from the window. His hands moved to the hem of his shirt. "I can't take it anymore," he muttered, half to himself, and started lifting it over his head. Tyler looked away instinctively, eyes flicking to the fan. He wasn't sure why the action hit him the way it did. Maybe it was how unbothered Julian seemed. Or maybe it was the fact that he wasn't. The tension in the room shifted. Something unspoken started to rise with the heat. Tyler forced a swallow, his throat dry as sand. Julian was now sitting back at the desk, bare-chested, head tilted back, eyes closed out. It was just the heat. That's all. But Tyler's stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. He lay back again, one arm over his forehead, trying to ignore the noise his thoughts were starting to make. Tyler woke sometime in the middle of the night, unsure of what had stirred him. The room was dark except for a soft glow coming from Julian's desk lamp. The fan was still spinning, its wheels were barely audible over the humming silence, but the air was still thick, muddy. The heat hadn't left, it had just settled into their bones. He blinked slowly, adjusting to the faint light, then turned his head slightly. Julian was still at the desk, head resting against the back of the chair, shirtless, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of shallow sleep. One arm hung loosely over the chair's side, his fingers twitching every now and then, like he was dreaming of something that wouldn't let him go. Tyler rolled onto his side, the sheets tangled around his legs, clinging to his skin. His own shirt had been discarded earlier. He couldn't even remember when, and he felt too drained to care how he looked or if Julian had noticed. Everything about the night felt hazy and slow, like time itself had softened and melted into the heat. He let out a breath, trying to force his eyes closed again, but sleep wouldn't come. Not with the way the silence seemed to vibrate between them. Julian stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open, unfocused. Then they met Tyler's. Neither of them moved. They just stared for a moment, eyes locked in the dimness, the quiet stretching between them like a thread pulled too tight. Tyler shifted, propping himself on one elbow. "You're not sleeping either?" he asked, voice low, careful. Julian gave a tired laugh, barely more than a breath. "How could anyone sleep in this?" he said, rubbing his eyes. "I feel like I'm breathing through soup." Tyler nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. There was a strange comfort in the shared misery. Like the heat had built a bridge between them where nothing else had managed to. In the past few days, they had exchanged pleasantries, small talk, awkward silence. But tonight something was different. Something unspoken had cracked open when Julian had stripped his shirt off earlier, something honest, vulnerable. Tyler didn't know what it was yet, but he could feel it now, close to the surface. Julian sat up straighter, running a hand through his hair, which was damp with sweat. "I think I've showered 3 times today. It doesn't help. I feel sticky 5 minutes later." "Yeah," Tyler said softly. "It's like we're not even drying off anymore. Just constantly wet." Julian smirked at the comment, and Tyler immediately regretted how it sounded. He felt his face grow warmer, not from the heat this time, and turned away, clearing his throat. Julian didn't seem to notice, or maybe he was being polite. Either way, Tyler was grateful. He reached over to the nightstand, grabbed his water bottle, took a sip, then offered it across the room. Julian hesitated before standing up, walking over to take it. Their fingers brushed briefly. That tiny touch, bare skin against bare skin, sent a strange current through Tyler, like a ripple moving beneath his chest. Julian didn't react. He just drank, then handed the bottle back. They stood there for a second, both aware of how close they were, how little space there was between them in the dim dorm room filled with sweat and silence. Tyler could smell the faint scent of soap and heat on Julian's skin, and it was both overwhelming and grounding. He sat back on the edge of his bed while Julian returned to the chair, stretching his arms over his head, his torso lengthening in the movement. Tyler caught himself staring and quickly looked away, annoyed at himself. What was he even doing? They didn't talk for a few minutes. Just the fan humming, papers fluttering lightly on the desk, and the occasional creak of the building. Then Julian spoke again, quieter this time. "You ever feel like the heat makes things louder?" Tyler looked over, confused. Louder? Julian nodded, his expression thoughtful. Not noise. Just thoughts. Feelings. Like everything's louder in here. He tapped the side of his head. When your body's already so uncomfortable. Tyler stared at him, something heavy moving inside him that he didn't have words for. He knew what Julian meant. He'd felt it too. That strange clarity that came in moments of physical discomfort, when all your usual defenses dropped and you were just left with whatever you'd been holding in. He shifted again, sitting cross-legged on the bed, hands fidgeting with the hem of his shorts. Yeah, he said finally. I've been feeling like that a lot lately. There was another pause, but this one felt softer. Not awkward. Just honest. Julian turned his chair slightly, facing him more directly now. You don't talk much, he said. But when you do, it's real. Tyler let out a quiet laugh. I guess I just don't know what to say most of the time. People make small talk to avoid being vulnerable. I skip the small talk and just avoid everything. Julian smiled gently, and the tension in the room shifted again, becoming something else. Still thick, still silent, but now threaded with a warmth that had nothing to do with the broken AC. Tyler didn't want to go back to sleep. He didn't want this strange, fragile moment to end. Not yet. So he asked something he hadn't meant to, something that came out before he could stop it. Why'd you smile earlier? When you took off your shirt? Julian blinked, a little surprised. Then he looked down, almost shy. I don't know. Maybe because I knew it'd make you uncomfortable. Tyler raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Julian laughed. Not in a mean way. Just, I wanted to see if you'd look away. Or if you'd look at me. Tyler swallowed hard. And did I? Julian nodded, his eyes meeting his again. Yeah. You did. Tyler didn't know how to respond. His thoughts were spinning again, louder, heavier. The heat wasn't the only thing making it hard to breathe anymore. The next morning brought no relief. If anything, the air felt thicker, almost cruel in how it pressed against every inch of skin. The sun had barely risen and already the room was a furnace. Tyler lay still in his bed, barely awake, listening to the hum of the fan as it struggled against the impossible. He didn't want to move. The sheets stuck to his legs, the pillow was hot under his cheek, and his body felt like it had been steamed overnight. But even more unbearable than the heat was the replaying of last night's conversation echoing in his mind. The things Julian had said, the way he looked at him, the way Tyler had looked back. He couldn't unhear it. Couldn't pretend he didn't feel it. That split second when their eyes met after Julian said, "Yeah, you did." It had shifted something in the room, in him. It unsettled him, not in a bad way, just in a way he didn't know how to handle. He turned over and glanced toward Julian's side of the room. The bed was empty. For a moment, his chest tightened with irrational worry, but then he heard the soft sound of water running from the shared bathroom down the hall. A second later, Julian emerged, towel around his neck, hair damp, face flushed from the cold shower. He looked like he was trying to fight the heat back with every ounce of effort he had. Tyler sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Did it help?" he asked, voice still thick with sleep. Julian shrugged, walking over to the closet to grab a fresh shirt. "For about 30 seconds. Then it was like the water turned to steam on my skin." He chuckled, but his shoulders looked heavy. Tired. The kind of tired that sleep alone couldn't fix. Tyler got up and grabbed his own towel, brushing past Julian with barely a word. But he felt it, the way Julian's eyes followed him as he walked out. The weight of that gaze stayed with him even as cold water crashed over his back in the shower. He leaned his forehead against the tile wall and let the water run down his spine, trying to cool the ache that had nothing to do with heat. It wasn't just attraction, at least he didn't think so. It was something more tangled. A longing, maybe? Or a curiosity he'd never been brave enough to explore. He'd spent most of his life pushing questions like this down, locking them in boxes and pretending they didn't exist. But Julian wasn't letting him do that anymore. Not by force, not even with intention, just by being present, unfiltered, open. It was terrifying. Back in the room, Tyler dried off and changed into clean clothes, still warm from the drawer. He didn't speak, just moved around quietly, his body caught in an invisible tension. Julian watched him from the desk, something unreadable in his expression. After a while, he broke the silence. "You okay?" he asked gently. Tyler nodded without looking at him. "Yeah. Just hot. And tired." Julian leaned back in the chair, his voice casual but careful. "Was it what I said last night? Did I make it weird?" Tyler froze for a second, fingers hovering over his laptop. He hesitated, then turned to face him. "I don't know. Maybe. I've just never had a conversation like that with anyone before." Julian tilted his head slightly, not mocking, just curious. "Like what?" Tyler took a breath, trying to put it into words. "Honest. Intimate. Not in a physical way. Just seeing past the layers. It's hard to explain." Julian nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he let on. "You don't talk about yourself much," he said. "But I think you've got a lot to say. You just don't think anyone wants to hear it." Tyler swallowed, throat dry again. He wasn't used to being seen this clearly. He wasn't used to someone naming the things he worked so hard to keep buried. "I didn't expect you to notice," he said quietly. Julian smiled, not wide, but kind. "I notice a lot. I just don't always say it." The room grew quiet again, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with something growing between them, steady and slow, like the tension before a storm. Tyler opened his laptop and pretended to read an email, but his thoughts wouldn't stay still. He kept glancing at Julian out of the corner of his eye, studying the curve of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed lightly against the desk, the way his lips parted slightly when he was focused. Every small detail started to matter more. And that scared him. Around noon, the sun was at its peak, and their small dorm felt like a sealed greenhouse. Julian stood up abruptly and opened the mini fridge, searching for something. "We're out of ice," he muttered, frustration creeping into his tone. Tyler sighed. "Want to go grab something cold from the cafeteria?" Julian turned around and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Sure. Or we could do something stupid and try to survive this room with popsicles and denial." Tyler laughed, surprised at how easy it felt to let out that sound. "Tempting. But I might melt before I get to enjoy it." They walked to the cafeteria together, side by side, not speaking much, but their steps were in rhythm. Tyler kept thinking about how strange this was, how being near Julian made him feel both more exposed and more at ease. Like he was walking into the unknown, but wasn't doing it alone. They bought a handful of cold snacks and drinks and returned to the dorm, where the heat still lingered like a ghost refusing to leave. As the day dragged on, Tyler found himself less focused on avoiding Julian and more aware of his own reactions. He caught himself watching him again, when he stretched, when he laughed, when he sighed in frustration. The thoughts he'd spent years pushing down were now loud and clear, refusing to be ignored. That night, as the sky darkened and they both sat in silence again, Julian looked at him and said, almost offhand, "I used to hate the heat. But I don't know. It kind of forces you to be honest with yourself." Tyler looked at him for a long time. "And what's it telling you right now?" Julian smiled softly, not breaking eye contact. "That maybe we're both trying too hard not to feel something we're already feeling." And Tyler didn't look away this time. The night crept in like it had been watching them all day, waiting for the right moment to fold over the dorm room and trap them in another layer of heat and silence. It was darker tonight, clouds veiled the moon, and the city's usual glow seemed further away. The fan kept spinning, relentless but helpless, pushing the same hot air in slow circles. Tyler sat on the floor with his back against the bed frame, an icy soda pressed to his neck, already sweating through the condensation. The cold barely lasted a minute before it gave up too, like everything else in the room. Julian was sitting cross-legged on his own bed, arms resting on his knees, shirt draped over his shoulder but not worn. Neither of them had said much since returning from the cafeteria. They'd exchanged glances, shared a few tired jokes, and then fallen into a stillness that somehow didn't feel empty. It was a quiet born from something deeper, like the air between them was filling with all the things they didn't know how to say yet. Tyler felt it growing inside him, a restlessness that had nothing to do with the temperature. Every time Julian shifted or stretched, Tyler's attention followed. Not just in the way eyes wander when bored, but in the way something pulled, subtle and constant, like a current beneath calm water. Julian wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and let out a long, frustrated breath. "I give up," he said softly, almost to himself. "I've tried everything. This heat's gonna kill me." Then he stood, walked slowly to the window, and opened it even wider, though there was no breeze. "It's like being stuck in a sauna with no exit." Tyler watched him from the floor, his soda can now warm in his hand. He didn't respond, just kept his eyes on Julian's movements, the way his shoulders tensed, the muscles in his back shifting as he leaned on the windowsill. Julian stood there for a moment, his body bathed in the faint orange from the streetlight below, then turned around and looked at Tyler. There was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, but also something else, resolve, maybe. Or the quiet exhaustion that comes with deciding you're done pretending. Without saying anything, he reached for the hem of his shorts and pulled them off, tossing them onto his bed. He stood there in nothing but boxers, bare-chested, the heat radiating off his skin like a second layer of light. Tyler blinked, his breath caught somewhere between his ribs and his throat. He didn't mean to stare, but he couldn't help it. Julian's body wasn't some sculpted fantasy. It was real, honest, sweat-slicked and marked with freckles, scars, small imperfections that made him human. Vulnerable. And beautiful. Julian looked down at him, eyes steady. "Don't overthink it," he said, voice calm but low. "I'm not trying to be weird. I'm just done being uncomfortable." Tyler nodded slowly, his mouth dry again. "Right. Yeah. No big deal." But it was a big deal. Because what Julian was doing, this casual honesty, this complete comfort in his own skin, was something Tyler had never allowed himself to feel. And now it was right in front of him, challenging everything he thought he could hide. Julian sat back down on the bed, legs crossed again, arms resting on his knees like before, completely unbothered by his own near-nakedness. Tyler tried to focus on anything else, the fan, the empty water bottle beside him, the sound of a car passing outside, but his eyes kept drifting back. And Julian noticed. Of course he did. "You can ask me anything," he said suddenly. "If you're wondering stuff." Tyler looked up, caught off guard. "Like what?" Julian shrugged. "Anything. Why I'm comfortable like this. What I'm thinking. What I meant last night. Anything." Tyler hesitated. Then, because something in him was tired of lying, he asked, "Why did you smile when I looked at you?" Julian's gaze softened. Because I was nervous, he said. But also, kind of hopeful. Tyler's heart pounded. Hopeful for what? Julian looked at him for a long moment, then dropped his gaze to the floor. That maybe you look back and not hate yourself for it. Tyler didn't speak. Couldn't. Something cracked wide open inside him, something he'd held shut for years. A flood of emotion rose up, confusion, fear, relief, sadness. All of it at once. His chest ached with the weight of it. I don't, he whispered, barely audible. I didn't. Julian looked back up, something flickering behind his eyes. I know, he said. I could tell. Tyler stood slowly, his knees unsteady, and walked toward the desk. He wasn't sure what he was doing, whether he needed space or if he just couldn't sit still anymore. He stared out the window, breathing in the humid air. Julian's voice came from behind him. I'm not trying to pressure you, Tyler. I want to be honest. And I want you to feel safe being honest too. Even if you don't know what you want yet. Tyler turned around, hands clenched at his sides. I've never had this before, he said. This kind of closeness. Someone seeing me. Really seeing me. It scares the hell out of me. Julian nodded slowly. It scared me too. But hiding from it didn't make it go away. There was silence again, heavy and warm, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a space being carved out, carefully, where both of them could be seen. Tyler walked back toward the bed and sat on the edge of it, not looking at Julian, but close enough to feel his presence. I don't know what to do with what I'm feeling, he admitted. Julian leaned forward slightly. You don't have to do anything. Just feel it. That's enough right now. Tyler looked down at his hands, then slowly turned his head, meeting Julian's eyes. And for the first time, he didn't look away. The air around them didn't change, but the air inside them did, less heavy, less restrained. Tyler let out a slow breath, closing his eyes briefly. Then he whispered, "Thank you?" Julian didn't ask for what. He didn't need to. He just sat there, steady and patient, a quiet invitation in the middle of a summer night. The morning sun poured in without mercy, lighting up every corner of the small dorm room with golden heat. No clouds, no breeze, just brightness and suffocation. The fan rattled like it was giving up, its motor tired of pretending it made a difference. Tyler sat at the edge of his bed, bent over, elbows on his knees, hands knotted together like they were holding him in place. Sleep had been a joke. He'd closed his eyes, but his mind refused to rest. Images, words, that moment with Julian, all of it looped like a whisper he couldn't silence. He had expected to wake up and feel some sort of clarity, maybe even distance. But if anything, everything felt more real now. His thoughts weren't cloudy anymore. They were sharp and loud. They dug in. Julian was still in bed, on his back, one arm flung over his eyes. The sheet had been kicked down to his ankles, his chest bare, skin glowing with a light sheen of sweat. He looked peaceful, calm in a way that made Tyler jealous. Like he had made peace with the heat, with himself, with everything. Tyler watched him for a moment longer than he should have, then forced his eyes away. He stood quietly, grabbing a shirt and pulling it over his head, not because it was needed, nothing could hide from the heat, but because he needed something to do, something to hold on to that wasn't a feeling. But even the shirt clung to him the second it touched his back, and he let out a frustrated sigh, tugging at the collar. Julian stirred then, his voice muffled but warm. "It's not going to help. You'll just get sweatier." Tyler didn't answer. He turned away, went to the small fridge, and grabbed 2 bottles of water. He placed one on Julian's nightstand and sat at the desk. Julian pushed himself up on his elbows, eyes still puffy from sleep. You okay? He asked, soft but not fragile. Tyler nodded. Yeah. Just thinking. Julian sat all the way up, wiping at his face. Thinking's dangerous when it's this hot. Tyler gave a weak smile, the kind that flickers and dies just as quickly. Yeah. You're right. There was silence for a bit, but not the heavy kind this time. It was a thoughtful quiet, like both of them were letting the day unfold at its own pace. Julian got up and walked to the window, leaning out to see the campus below. He stayed there for a while, his back to Tyler, letting the morning sunlight catch on the curve of his shoulders. Tyler watched him again, his chest tight with something he didn't know how to name. It wasn't just attraction. It wasn't just confusion. It was deeper than that. Like seeing someone else live a version of life you never thought you were allowed to want. Julian turned around, eyes searching. You're different today, he said. Quieter. Like you're waiting for something to fall. Tyler took a breath, steadying himself. I guess I'm trying to figure out who I am. Or what this is. Whatever's happening between us. Julian walked back and sat at the foot of Tyler's bed, close but not too close. I'm not trying to make you figure it all out at once, he said gently. I feel something when I'm around you. And I don't want to ignore it. Tyler stared at the floor, words caught in his throat. I've never felt safe being seen like this, he admitted. Even when people were kind, it felt like they were only seeing the surface. Julian nodded slowly. I know that feeling. But you don't have to explain everything. You don't owe me that. Tyler looked up, really looked at him. But I want to. I want to try. Julian gave a soft smile, that same one that always looked a little tired but full of meaning. Then try. Tyler stood and paced the room once before sitting on the edge of Julian's bed this time. It felt bold. Exposed. But it also felt necessary. I've always played it safe, he said. Not just with people, relationships, feelings, but with everything. I didn't even realize how much I was holding back until I met you. You exist without apology. It makes me question why I've spent so much of my life trying to hide. Julian didn't interrupt. He just listened, leaning forward slightly, elbows on his knees. You don't have to be like me, he said after a moment. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But I think you're braver than you think. You just needed someone to sit in the heat with you long enough to see it. The words hit Tyler hard. Not in a dramatic way, but in a way that settled into his chest and stayed there. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and looked away to blink back the sting in his eyes. Julian reached over then, slow and without pressure, and touched his arm. Just a gentle press of fingers, but it was grounding. Honest. Tyler turned his hand over, letting Julian's fingers slide into his. They sat like that, hands lightly clasped, no rush, no explanation needed. The connection was enough. The moment was enough. After a while, Julian leaned back and let go, not because he wanted to, but because he respected the silence that followed. Tyler felt it, the absence of the touch, but also the gift of space. He stood again, stretching, and turned on the small Bluetooth speaker they kept on the desk. A low instrumental track played, slow and mellow, filling the room with something other than the hum of heat. Julian raised an eyebrow. Didn't know you were into this kind of music. Tyler smiled, the first real one of the day. There's a lot you don't know about me. Julian tilted his head, that same gentle curiosity returning to his face. Then I want to learn. If you'll let me. Tyler nodded. Yeah. I think I want that too. The sun was still merciless outside, but inside the room, something had shifted again. Not cooled, not resolved, but softened. They were no longer strangers with shared discomfort. They were something else now. Something still undefined, but filled with possibility. As the afternoon light spilled across the floor, casting long shadows behind them, Tyler sat again, close enough to feel Julian's warmth. Not the heat of the summer. Not the sweat and stickiness of broken air conditioning. But the warmth of something blooming quietly between them, like a truth neither of them had spoken aloud yet but both understood. And for the first time, Tyler didn't feel like running from it. Evening came slower than usual, dragging behind it a sky streaked with orange and purple, the kind of soft twilight that never fully arrived because of the heat that still clung to everything like a second skin. The dorm room hadn't cooled, not even with the sun slipping behind the buildings. It was as if the walls themselves had stored the day's heat, and now exhaled it back, unwilling to let go. But something in the room felt different anyway. Tyler sat at the window, arms resting on the sill, the warm air brushing across his face in lazy waves. It wasn't much, but he didn't mind. His thoughts were louder than the heat now. Julian was lying across his bed, one leg dangling off the side, his phone in his hand but his attention elsewhere. He wasn't scrolling or texting, just staring at the screen like it had answers he wasn't sure how to ask for. Tyler's mind had been looping the same feelings all day, quiet and constant. He kept replaying their conversation from the morning, the way Julian had touched his arm, the weight of those few seconds when their hands had fit together like that was a normal thing, like it had always been supposed to happen. No one had ever reached for him like that without demanding something in return. No one had ever sat in silence with him and made it feel meaningful. But Julian had, and he hadn't asked for explanations. He had just seen him. Tyler didn't know how to process it fully, not yet, but he knew it meant something real. "You're thinking again," Julian said without looking up. Tyler smiled faintly. "I'm always thinking." Julian glanced over, smirking. "That's true. But it's different when you go quiet like this. You start staring into space like you're trying to rewrite the universe in your head." Tyler turned away from the window and leaned back against the wall, legs stretched out in front of him. "Maybe I am," he said. "Maybe I'm just trying to figure out where I fit in the version of the universe I've avoided for a long time." Julian sat up slowly, his expression softening. "Do you feel like you don't fit anywhere?" Tyler didn't answer right away. His fingers played with the hem of his shorts, twisting the fabric, tugging at loose threads. "Most of the time, yeah. Like I'm always performing for someone. Trying to be the person they expect me to be. But never really me." Julian didn't interrupt. He just waited, patient and quiet. Tyler took a breath and continued. "I think I got so used to hiding that I forgot how to want anything out loud. Even if it was just someone to see me for who I really am." Julian moved off the bed and sat on the floor across from him, their knees almost touching. "You don't have to hide here," he said gently. "Not with me." Tyler looked up, really meeting his eyes. "Why do you care so much?" Julian tilted his head, thoughtful. "Because I know what it feels like to go unseen. And I don't want you to feel like that, not when you're with me. I don't need you to be perfect or figured out. I just want you to be real." Tyler's throat tightened. No one had ever told him that. Not in words that direct, not in a tone that soft. He leaned his head back against the wall and let out a shaky breath. "I'm scared," he said. "Scared that if I start being real, everything will change. That I won't know who I am anymore." Julian leaned in a little closer. "Change isn't the enemy. Pretending is." They sat like that for a long while, just breathing, existing. The fan groaned in the background, the only sound in the room besides their breaths. At some point, Julian stood up and crossed to the fridge, pulling out 2 more water bottles, handing one to Tyler without a word. Tyler accepted it, their fingers brushing again, and this time neither of them flinched. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a quiet promise, something shared between them that didn't need to be spoken. They ended up sitting side by side on the bed, not touching, just close. The window still open, music playing faintly from Julian's phone. The playlist was soft, mostly instrumental, the kind of music that wrapped around you like a whisper instead of making demands. Tyler rested his head against the wall and closed his eyes. "You know what's weird?" he asked after a while. "This room, even though it's small and hot and kind of awful, it feels better with you in it. Like I can breathe a little easier." Julian didn't say anything right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost like he was afraid to say it too loudly. "That's how I know this means something." Tyler turned to look at him, not moving too fast, just enough to meet his gaze. Julian was already looking back, eyes steady, unflinching. "What does it mean to you?" Tyler asked. Julian shrugged a little, like he was trying to play it off, but there was nothing casual in his voice. "It means I'm not pretending either. That this, whatever we're figuring out, it's not just in your head." Tyler nodded, something in his chest relaxing. "I needed to hear that," he admitted. Julian smiled, not smug, not proud, just honest. "I know." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't the kind that needed filling. It was the kind that meant something had settled, something had found its place. Tyler felt the edge of Julian's thigh brush against his. He didn't move away. He didn't overthink it. He just let the moment be what it was. For the first time in a long time, he felt still, not stuck, not anxious. Just still. Outside, the night had fully fallen, but neither of them noticed. Inside, the room glowed faintly with the soft light of the desk lamp, and 2 boys sat side by side on a twin-sized bed, not speaking, not needing to. The heat remained stubborn as ever, but somehow, it didn't matter as much anymore. Not when their hearts had started to open, not when the silence between them had become something that healed instead of hurt. By the time the next day rolled around, the dorm room had taken on a strange, dreamlike quality. Everything felt slower, like the world outside had paused and left Tyler and Julian inside some quiet, hidden space where time didn't move the way it used to. The air was still thick, just as warm, the fan just as useless, and yet none of it pressed on Tyler the way it had days ago. Something inside him had shifted. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was close, like standing on the edge of peace, ready to step in but still afraid of what might happen if he did. He hadn't told Julian everything. Not yet. But each word, each conversation, had loosened something in his chest, and last night's silence had spoken volumes that neither of them had dared to say out loud. Tyler sat cross-legged on his bed, shirtless now, finally letting go of the need to be uncomfortable for the sake of appearances. His body was hot, yes, but for once he wasn't ashamed of it. He wasn't ashamed of the way he looked or the way Julian sometimes looked at him either. He was starting to understand that there was safety in being seen, in not hiding. Across from him, Julian was sprawled out on the floor with a pillow beneath his head, flipping through a comic book he wasn't really reading. His eyes kept drifting, and every now and then they'd meet Tyler's. No tension anymore. Just this quiet understanding between them that had taken shape in the cracks of their shared discomfort. They hadn't talked about labels or anything too serious. But everything they did lately, every word, every look, every moment, felt intentional. It wasn't some dramatic confession. It wasn't even romance, at least not in the way Tyler had always thought it had to look. It was care. Gentle, quiet, steady care. And for Tyler, that was new. He wasn't used to being held in someone's attention without feeling like he had to earn it. Julian rolled onto his side, resting his cheek on his arm, the comic book forgotten on the floor. You ever think about how weird it is that we ended up in this exact room? Out of all the dorms and people and days, it's this. Tyler looked down at his hands, fingers curled in his lap. I think about it all the time, he said. Like something lined up just right and put us here so I could finally stop pretending. Julian's eyes softened, his voice low and careful. You were pretending a lot, huh? Tyler nodded. Always. Even when I didn't realize it. Even in the way I walked or talked or chose my clothes. Everything felt like a performance. I spent years making sure no one ever looked at me too closely. He paused, swallowing hard. And you didn't even try. You just saw me. Julian sat up slowly, crossing his legs and leaning forward slightly. That's because I know what it feels like to be invisible. And I promised myself a long time ago, if I ever saw someone else fading like that, I wouldn't ignore it. Tyler stared at him, heart thudding in a quiet rhythm. He didn't know what to say. Gratitude didn't seem like enough. But Julian didn't seem to be looking for thanks, just honesty. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, breast shallow, as if the weight of being honest had suddenly made the room even hotter. Do you ever worry, he asked, that if you let someone see all of you, they won't like what they find? Julian smiled faintly. I used to. But then I realized that hiding just guarantees they'll never know the real me. And if they're only choosing the version I've filtered for them, that connection's never going to feel real. Tyler absorbed that slowly, the truth of it settling deep. It was hard to argue with. And yet, the fear didn't just vanish. It still sat in the background, whispering old stories about rejection and shame. But Julian had given him another story to listen to. One where softness wasn't weakness. One where silence didn't mean disinterest. One where seeing and being seen could be an act of love, not judgment. Later that afternoon, they shared lunch at their desks, not saying much but comfortable in the quiet. Tyler noticed how Julian would pass him things without being asked, how he knew exactly when Tyler was low on water, how he made space for him without needing to announce it. Those small things added up. And Tyler, who had never been good at recognizing subtle kindness, was finally beginning to notice. When the food was gone and the room had returned to its usual, unbearable heat, Julian pulled the blinds halfway closed and turned on the playlist they'd fallen into the habit of playing each evening. The soft melodies filled the air like a breath of cooler air. Tyler lay back on his bed, arm resting over his forehead, watching the ceiling spin. I don't think I've ever been this close to someone, he said quietly. Not like this. Not without it turning into something awkward or distant. Julian, who was now lying on the floor again, arms crossed beneath his head, replied just as softly. That's because this isn't built on expectations. We're just here. Showing up. No pressure. No roles to play. Tyler turned his head, eyes locking with Julian's. There was something in that gaze, unspoken but loud. A kind of safety that made Tyler want to stay in this room forever. Broken AC and all. The day faded slowly, the sky outside dimming to shades of lavender and gray. They talked more as night approached, not about feelings this time, but about childhood, music, books they never finished, the classes they hated. They laughed even. Not because anything was particularly funny, but because it felt good. Free. Tyler didn't realize how tightly he'd been holding himself until he noticed how easily the laughter came when he was with Julian. It had taken days, a broken AC, and a suffocating dorm room to finally melt the walls he'd spent years building around himself. But they were melting now, and what was left underneath was someone he didn't hate. Someone who wanted to be held. To be known. That night, as they got ready for bed, the silence returned, but this time it felt gentle. Julian turned off the desk lamp and left only the glow of the hallway light seeping under the door. Tyler lay facing the wall, his back to Julian, eyes open. He felt the shift of sheets behind him as Julian settled in, and then nothing for a long while. Just the sound of the fan, the city outside, the quiet hum of a dorm room holding two boys who had discovered something they didn't yet have a name for. Tyler closed his eyes, not to escape the moment, but to keep it. To hold on to the warmth, not from the air, but from the boy just a few feet away, who had unknowingly pulled him out of hiding and into something real. The morning after was different. Not in some loud, dramatic way, but in all the quiet ones that mattered. The dorm room still carried the same thick warmth, the same dry air, and the same useless hum of the fan, but everything inside it had changed. The weight of unspoken things that had hung heavy for days had finally lifted. Tyler could feel it the moment he opened his eyes. His body was still tired, sticky from sleep and heat, but his chest wasn't tight like it used to be. It was like some hidden pressure had dissolved overnight, and all that remained now was a deep, strange calm. Julian was already awake, sitting at his desk with his headphones on, the glow from his laptop screen casting soft light across his face. He looked relaxed, shoulders loose, legs stretched out, fingers lightly tapping the keys. Tyler watched him for a moment without saying anything, noticing the way his mouth moved slightly with the music he was listening to, the way his head swayed just enough to show he was completely at ease. And in that second, Tyler knew he didn't want to go back. Not to pretending. Not to silence. Not to being half visible in someone else's world. He pushed himself up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His voice came out quiet and dry. "Hey." Julian turned around, slipping one side of his headphones off. "Morning," he said, his voice softer than usual, like he already sensed something was shifting again. Tyler stood and walked toward the fridge, grabbing 2 bottles of water without thinking, already moving in sync with the rhythm they'd built. He handed one to Julian, who took it with a nod, their fingers brushing again. This time, the contact didn't surprise either of them. It was natural now. Familiar. After a few sips, Tyler leaned against the edge of the desk, facing Julian. The words were there, waiting. Not forced. Just waiting. "You remember what you said the other night? About change not being the enemy?" Julian looked up, his eyes steady. "Yeah." Tyler nodded slowly. "I think I'm ready for it. Not all at once. But I want to stop hiding. From you. From myself." Julian didn't smile. Not yet. He just held Tyler's gaze, letting him say what he needed to say without interruption. Tyler continued, his voice more sure now. "It's not just about this room or the heat or the weird way we ended up here together. It's about how you made space for me. How you didn't push. You let me figure it out. That meant something." Julian finally let a small smile form, quiet and genuine. "I wasn't going anywhere. I just wanted you to feel like you had time. And choice." Tyler looked down at his hands, then back up. "I choose this," he said. "Whatever this is. I'm not great at defining things, but I know I don't want this to fade when the heat does." Julian stood slowly, stepping closer, closing the small space between them. He reached out and gently took Tyler's hand, their palms fitting together without hesitation now. "It doesn't have to fade," he said. "We've already built something real. Even if we don't have the words for it yet. They stood like that for a long time, the world outside moving on without them, but nothing needing to rush. The campus would return to normal soon. Summer would pass. The AC would eventually be fixed. But Tyler knew this stretch of days, this heatwave that had forced him out of hiding, would stay with him forever. It had cracked him open, shown him who he really was beneath all the fear, and introduced him to someone who saw that version of him without blinking. Later that day, maintenance arrived. An older man in coveralls and a ball cap knocked on the door, apologized for the delay, and began fixing the AC unit in the corner. Tyler and Julian stood back, watching the man fiddle with wires and curse under his breath. It only took 20 minutes. A few adjustments, a part replaced, a hum, and then cool air. Real, clean, life-saving air poured from the vents for the first time in days. Tyler closed his eyes as the breeze hit his face, and for a moment, he almost felt the weight of the past week leave his body. Julian laughed beside him. "I forgot what it felt like not to be slowly cooked alive." Tyler smiled, opening his eyes. "Yeah. Kind of makes you appreciate the suffering in a weird way." They spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning up, tossing out empty water bottles, folding the laundry that had been scattered around, wiping down surfaces that had been sticky for too long. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like something. Like closing one chapter and preparing for another. That evening, for the first time since they met, they didn't sleep with their backs to each other. The beds had always been pushed slightly apart, but Julian reached over and moved his mattress a little closer, just a few inches, nothing dramatic. Tyler didn't comment. He simply adjusted his pillow and lay facing him. They talked into the night again, but this time the words weren't heavy. They were light, teasing, full of easy laughter and shared memories already forming. Tyler told Julian about the time he got stuck in a library elevator for 2 hours and cried even though he told everyone he didn't. Julian shared how he used to rehearse fake arguments in his head just so he'd win them in real life. Every story was a thread weaving them closer. Every laugh a stitch tightening the fabric between them. Before the lights went out, Tyler reached over, his fingers searching gently in the dark until they found Julian's. Their hands settled between the beds, barely visible in the shadow, but undeniably there. And with that, sleep came easier. There was no dramatic ending, no kiss that broke silence, no sudden revelation. Just a slow, warm build of something real, something that had been waiting quietly in the corners of long conversations and stolen glances. Something that had bloomed in the heat and now found space to breathe in the cool. If you've ever wondered what it means to be seen, to be truly seen by someone who expects nothing but truth, then maybe you've already felt a piece of what Tyler found in that broken, overheated dorm. Sometimes it doesn't take fireworks or perfect words. Sometimes all it takes is someone who sits with you in the silence long enough for you to hear yourself. Thank you for being here. If this story made you feel something, even quietly, leave a comment. Tell me what parts stayed with you. And if you'd like more stories like this, you know what to do. Subscribe, share it, and let someone else feel seen, too.